Welcome. I am so happy that everyone has shown up today. I am Daryl Allen. I am broadcasting live from West Central Seventh-day Adventist Church here in beautiful Oak Park, Illinois, and that's in the USA. But that is not nearly as important as the fact that our special guest today is a thought leader, a ministry leader, MDiv from U of Chicago, and is a nationally recognized speaker on anti-racism at universities across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, our privilege to hear from an individual today, Yvonne T Gilmore. And Yvonne, thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing. I would say more, but the time is yours.
Awesome. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Daryl Allen and Cliff Wright. I'm so grateful to be with all of you and to be a part of this great camp meeting. I have the privilege of co-hosting a podcast called "Are We Whole Yet?" Are we whole yet? And I'll say right that there's both an emphasis on wholeness, but also on the we. Right. It isn't just sort of "Are you whole? Am I whole?" That we ask those questions, right? But that also are we whole? And so I'll say we started this actually just a few months ago, and we're thinking about wholeness within the context of religious life, but also right, those folks outside of, on the margins of religious communities. So many places, certainly the report, right, that U.S. church membership has fallen below the majority for the first time, right, really in history. So under 50% is at 47%. And so as we were thinking about right, how to engage folks, because certainly people are thinking about wholeness. You can't live, right, and not wrestle with the question of what it means to be whole, right? Certainly the Bible, right, in John 5, right, Jesus sees a man there who it says he's had, his condition, he's been lying there and wrestling with some things for some time. And out of that kind of long-term predicament of challenge, right? Jesus says, "Do you want to be made well?" Think also about right, literary, folks like Tony Capambara, right, who wrote the novel "The Salt Eaters," right, who asks the question, right? Are you sure you want to be made well, right? You really want to be made well, right? Because if you're ready, right, wholeness is no trifling matter, right? There's a lot of weightiness to it, and so we wanted to begin a podcast, to have a conversation, to have to talk with folks both within the context of religious institutions, but also on the kind of margins, right? To make space for storytelling, to make space to kind of explore, right? What does wholeness mean? What does it mean to be whole individual? Mean for us to be whole, recognizing it's a construct that it involves the we, right? It involves social locations. It involves, right, people in communities. It isn't just something that's of our own, right, individual making, right, but comes out of and is an outgrowth of relationship with God, relationship, right, with the community, relationship, right, with oneself, and then in fact our learning about that, right, that often we have some ideas and experiences, and then we also need space, right, to be able to kind of connect the dots. So I'll say, right, kind of large, broadly, as we think about the kind of contours of wholeness, right, I think there are stories that we hear about invisibility, about erasure, about affirmation. I'm going to tell a few of those stories, and then kind of come back to some of the ways that we kind of make meaning, right, about it. Right. So one that kind of comes to mind was actually a person who's a church planter, right, who was talking about all the joy and the grief that comes with trying to build a faith community, right, where community did not exist, and in this case, doing so in a pretty interesting location, so that they sometimes meet in garden spaces, right, or they meet right, just in even the bowling alley once there, right, where people already are, and they just begin to have like a worship service. And so at this one service, they have a DJ, right, that they had hired to kind of come out And so they were talking about, this is a new way to kind of do church. So I'll say everybody, this isn't for everybody, but they're at service, and then they have a moment for where they're lifting up kind of joys and concerns, right? And so the DJ out and says, DJ so and so over here, and so they think like, does he not know we're praying, right? Like we're in the middle of prayer. Uh, but he begins to invoke, right, prayer concerns, and he says, I grew up in a particular place, and I haven't been to church in 15 years, and so they begin to see that like uh, this meant a great deal to him, and as many people as they wanted to show up didn't show up, so they might have had like a crowd of 20 that day, whereas they wanted a few more even with the DJ present, and it became right clear, right, that the person they were ministering to and that was ministering to them, right, was this DJ that they had hired, right, where the role wasn't quite what they thought it was supposed to be. And so, as they continued, right, in even in the journey in terms of thinking about, right, what it means to be whole, that their purpose, their kind of target goal was, we want to begin to create community, right, in this place. But then the ways that they do it, right, I believe they saw the holy opened up. They saw God open up, right, connection and relationship in places where they hadn't quite expected it or anticipated it. Even though, right, they had the kind of plans for how the service was going to go and how it was going to flow, right, when it was disrupted, right, is where a different kind of connection, right, began to kind of creep in, and so they found themselves, right, found even as they were finding others, right, in a different way, right. So as I think about, what it means to be, lost and found, right, even the hymn, right, Amazing Grace, that I think that as we think about wholeness, creating it, discovering, right, new language, right, even for what wholeness can be and what it can mean. I also think about a recent interview that we did, um, with a prominent thought leader, right, who talks about the fact that her father, growing up, right, that she's African American, and that social location, particularly several decades ago, right, met some significant challenges, and so even at 8 years old, right, her dad says to her, you're an African American female, and that's going to mean that your life is hard in some ways, and so I want you to know that, but I also don't want to take away your hope. And so, this is of course puzzling a bit for an 8-year-old to kind of piece together. And so she talks about, right, being in elementary school, and someone, right, calling her out of her name, and her saying to the teacher, she's not supposed to refer to me in that way. I want you to call my parents. But also, right, she told this young person, that's not who I am, right? It was jarring as it is, right? When other people's perception of our identity doesn't match our own perception of our identity. But that at 8 years old, right, being able to name, no, 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 this is who I am. And the narrative you're offering, right, is not consistent with my understanding of who I am. So she talks about, right, for her in her own child's life, having that understanding. But that not only did her dad, tell her that, but then her dad actually required that they read books about history every week. And then in order to get their allowance, they had to read a book a week. And so she talks about the gift of that. And then also names, right, that she always got her allowance because she was an avid reader, right, which is important. But that being told that, right, also being told, if others compliment you because you're lighter skin or they say your hair is lovely, you tell them everybody's hair is lovely, right? You tell them everybody's skin is beautiful, right? And so having that be reinforced over and over, when in fact she met the kind of wider standards for beauty, right? And so part of what he was also telling her was, you're going to be perceived a certain way because as we look at these social hierarchies, right, you kind of fit this bill. But right, I want you to know that doesn't mean what other people are telling you it means, right? That in fact, you say we all are beautiful, right? This hierarchy is a lie. It's facetious, right? We all fit within it. And so then, as she's confronted both with this moment, right, where she's called out of her name, as people, do in fact, right, affirm, hey, you meet all the standards for right, beauty and appearance, and these things mean what they mean, right, that she was able to assert, and it gave her a different frame of reference for wholeness, right? Over time, what her dad said, right, at 8 years old made sense. But it, yeah, over time, it didn't make sense in that moment, right? But through, right, vast life experiences, right, she was able to kind of see and piece together, right, what wholeness, the ways that it was going to be challenged, right, but also, right, the ways that she was being invited to connect it to the we. Right, that I particularly love the story of her dad telling her that, because her dad was making it clear, it's not enough that I just support, right, you being whole, saying, hey, you're beautiful, right? Hey, you're smart. Hey, you're strong. Hey, that doesn't apply to you. Right. But that in nurturing her own sense of wholeness was intimately, right, connected with, and right, you've got to be able to affirm the worth and the value of others, right, and understand yourself in relationship, to that. I'm going to invoke just one more kind of story that was told on the podcast. This was a young man from Chicago, who grew up on the South Side there, and talks about at 9 and 10 years old that they would drive down, um, Stony Island, and or no, it's 79th Street, and that often he'd be in the car with his mom, and they would see a woman being accosted, uh, you know, hit, spoken to in some way that was abusive, right? Just really clearly inappropriate behavior. And so he says this would happen like on a regular basis, that at least once or twice a week, they'd be driving down 79th Street and they would see this exchange between a man and a woman, and they would pull the car over, and his mom would say, "Hey, you don't treat her like that." And so he says, at 10 years old, I'm in the car and I'm like praying, like God protect my mother. I can't. I don't know what to do. Right. I'm. What we're seeing is unsettling, but I don't want my mom to get hurt. But also, like, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? So this young man actually grew up to become a professor who studies women identity and kind of wrestles, right, with these issues. But it was fascinating to hear him, right, think about from early on, that this became a pattern. And he was like, listen, my mother wasn't a tremendously assertive. She was actually a pretty genteel kind of woman. But she was letting me know, as I'm observing this throughout life, that, like, right, it wasn't okay to treat people a certain way. And again, what fascinated me about his recounting, and all we did, I'll tell you, the prompt was only, we want to hear a story about wholeness. We didn't ask for for, there was no other specific criteria. It was, tell us about wholeness, right? Like, what stories come to mind for you? And so the fact that that was his story about wholeness, right, was, uh, this recurring thing as I'm driving down the streets of Chicago, and I see my mother's engagement with her community, but also, right, with me as her child. And so, right, whatever it meant to be whole, right, was to care for others, right, and was to name and assert that, like, um, the contours of whole my life are connected with the contours of wholeness in your life, right? In a way that means, uh, grace, right? That we're gracious towards each other in a way that means we show, right, love and care and commitment, in a way that resists invisibility, right? It's entirely possible, right, to allow, right, that kind of violence around you to be invisible, to go, I'm in a car, I'm safe. Let's keep going. Uh, right, but to hear him tell this story about, right, his mother resisting that invisibility, and then for him to be able, right, to begin to do that in his scholarship, right, as he grew, right, to get a PhD in the study, right, and to continue to kind of tell those stories. So yeah, I'll say, hopefully you have a sense of yeah, the podcast has been wonderfully rich, to kind of get at the weight of wholeness, right? The weightiness of it, as Tony K. Bumbara, right, talks about, right? To be whole is no trifling matter. There's a weightiness to it, right? But to also, I think, to get at the messiness, right? The messiness of Christian life, which is, um, by and large, obviously, right, we serve and are created right by a master who has it all figured out. But I think in terms of being able to speak to how we connect the dots within the context of Christian life, right, within our own formation, and then between each other, as we're all right, kind of, I think our thought leaders are hopefully heart leaders, as well, that we proclaim, right, a peace that passes understanding, but also I think a peace that supports our understanding, right. And so I think the podcast gives us a chance to kind of talk through and talk about and have a wider conversation, right, about sometimes there are platitudes, I think, say, right. So if you don't actually know peace, right, saying there's a peace that passes all understanding, right, it just becomes this kind of empty platitude, and I think it's especially platitudinous if you don't have any understanding, right? If there is no wisdom, then you're like, what are you talking about, right? And so unless you have a piece that helps you connect the dots, right, and really kind of think through the stories and movements and moments of your life, right, and what this has to do, right, with the wider body of Christ, right, what this has to do with God's word, then then the piece that goes past your understanding doesn't it doesn't do much for you unless you're kind of right beginning to kind of build up that foundation. Um, yeah, and I'll just say as my own kind of observation, right? I think when I first sort of heard the report, right, about U.S. church membership falling below, majority for the first time, I just think that there's such a tremendous opportunity in that, because what that says to me is there are all these people that are searching for. I don't think it's about searching for affiliation. I think they're searching for right relationship and connection, right, where folks can connect the dots and begin to understand and make sense about right what whole life means, right. So that for those of us that are connected to communities of faith, right, and uh, um, uh, yeah, with the body of Christ, it's because we found right some language, right. We found right some things that help us understand ourselves and grow. And so I think in terms of thinking about right how do we connect, there is a tremendous opportunity, right, to both teach, right, but also to learn from, right, folks that are not yet connected. I think for meaningful and good reasons, right? That the supposition, particularly of the podcast, isn't that we know more than others, right? But is that we're all in this learning together. We're all in it, in the thick of the messiness of it, and right in the midst of a really profound transition, right? So the COVID-19 pandemic, right, that has shifted all of us, right, not because we didn't really have a choice about it, but it is a kind of grand opportunity to, where we've had to resituate ourselves, right, and the things that made us whole, whatever our structures were, both in terms of our thought structures and our heart and our communal structures, right, have been kind of reshifted, but that it also presents an opportunity for us to go, okay, in the midst of where this tremendous life change and transition, um, yeah, how can we have a different kind of conversation, right, about what it means to be whole? Now, I'll just name that there is like a visual dimension, but also the podcast piece was huge because people I've been hearing during the pandemic that folks are like, I'm zoomed out sometimes, right? I don't want to look at a visual, and so sometimes it's just great to have audio, right, where I can kind of just put it on in the house or the car and have a different kind of experience than sitting on the computer. So I will, yeah, I'll kind of conclude with that. But yeah, that I'm thrilled and excited to be able to kind of talk about this. And yeah, you can go on iTunes and check it out there. And then the Christian Church Disciples of Christ YouTube channel is where you can find visual to connect to.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. um, so, wow, there's a lot in there. My first thing is I need to make sure I understand the correct title of the weightiness of wholeness. You gave the author, but
Yes.
I'm just going to start telling people that my guest, Yvonne Gilmore, said the weighted, and then I'm not quoting it right. So what is the book that you got that from?
Absolutely. So it's the novel, The Salt Eaters, which of course it's some fun Christian images there. And then Tony K. Bambara, B-A-M-B-A-R-A, Tony K. Bambara. That there's a quote, are you sure you want to be well? Are you ready to be healed? Right, because wholeness is no trifling matter. There's a lot of weight to it.
Yeah, the weightiness of wholeness. That's yeah. So with that, I think one of my things that comes down to that is the podcast. And was that something that came out of being in a pandemic and no longer having the traditional visuals, or did you start that before the pandemic?
No. That really, it's been a more recent development because in the midst of the pandemic, we went, we want to try to reach people, and I'll say it also. There's been a little more connectivity among folks in terms of just seeking digital resources, and so this really was an outgrowth to go. What can we do that both reaches folks that are kind of within church structures, but also that we really want to expand the conversation to folks outside of church structures to begin to have a different kind of dialogue. And so thinking, we want to take advantage and build on this digital moment to try to reach as many as possible.
Wonderful. You also mentioned understanding, in the one story, the father telling his daughter to understand your place in the hierarchy. And in looking at wholeness and where we're at in your work with anti-racism movements and speaking and all that, can you talk to some? I guess my question comes from, if I wasn't told that from my dad when I was 8, and now I'm a grown person seeing the stuff that's going on around me, how do I find my place? Because all of us have a place.
Absolutely.
You don't really choose it. Society chooses it for you. You choose how you navigate through it. So how would I find that? I tell youth all the time, there's a privilege ladder, right? That exists. We didn't build it; it's there. So can you just touch on that just a little bit on how does someone go through introspection? You can't tell a grown person where they're at, right? You can, and I don't know how much impact it has on them. But if I'm looking for myself and I say, hey, I see this around me and it doesn't make sense. I need to find out more about myself. Where do I start that journey?
Wow. So there's so many places to start. What I'll say 2 things, probably more, but I'll start with 2 things. So one, I think, this present moment, where, certainly Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist is blown up. And I don't think it's because he's necessarily saying anything new, I do think he's putting things together, in a way that enables us to digest it, and makes it palatable and accessible. And I'll say that, that all of us have a personal identity and a social identity. And so your personal identity, may, may be wholly, maybe you've said, I, and I don't think this applies for all of us, but a lot of my life is going to be shaped around lessons and the light, that I received from that man, or you grew up playing basketball, or you lived in the Southwest and the kind of culture of that, shapes your personal identity, or things about your family, or whatever your makeup is. Or I've heard people say, talk about food, it's shaping you, but whatever that is, each of us has a personal identity that may or may not be shaped by wider kind of social factors. Each of us also has a social identity, and a lot of that, we don't have any control over, so that the social constructs, of race, of looking at first language, and national origin, and how those things are perceived in the world, right? Women and gender, right? Looking at education and class status, right? some of these things. There may be some control, maybe too strong a word, right? But there are these identity factors, right, exist within a very particular social hierarchy, and it's significant. It's dangerous to not be aware of them, right? In fact, because they can have some consequences, right, if you don't display a certain sensitivity to some of these factors. And so I'll say I think that if there's a possibility, right, for getting involved with, right, doing anti-racism work, doing other work around just identity formation, and sometimes that happens within the context of churches. And certainly there are lots of kind of nonprofits out there, right? But I think that that work isn't just that work is about kind of wider public advocacy, but it's also about, right, the kind of self-awareness that we need in terms of our own identity, right? I think in order to be whole and understand the connection. And so I think that first you want to kind of identify, right? Yeah, right. Like, what is my what is my personal identity, and then how does that relate to social identity? What's the connection? And then also the other thing I talk about quite a bit, right, is identity salience, right? Like what's actually salient for you, right? What comes up? What's in your awareness on a daily basis? Because the reality is, if you're around people where what's salient for them about their identity and what's salient for you is really different, right? Often tension, right? It comes from there. So I'll say there's a like Sojourners, the magazine. It's actually 2017, but they did a poll, and they said white Christians don't believe that police brutality is as bad as Black Christians say it is, and so like 60% or something like that. And so I see this poll, and I'm just thinking, like, it's because it's not salient for you, right? It isn't. I don't think indicator of racism. I think it's an indicator that your daily awareness, right, involves a whole different set of experiences and awarenesses. And so, yeah, if your social location didn't mean you get to interact with these dynamics, of course, you're going to think that that's different, right? Subsequent, given, all of the bearing witness that we've all done, unfortunately, in more recent history, right? Those polls have changed because the awareness has changed. But I'll say I think that really wrestling with and finding, right, community, because we need conversation partners, right, with eyes to see. And I believe that God placed us in communities to help us have ears to hear and eyes to see, right, things that we may be a bit blind to, and to help us identify. I mean, I love you, talking about young people, right? To begin to go, how did this person, right, carve out a pathway that was outside of the social mold, right? That maybe where you're from, this is what most people do, but there are greater possibilities or other possibilities, right, that exist for you. And so giving folks vast tools, right, to be able to make those choices. I'll say there's a quote actually by Audre Lorde that is in Ibram Kendi's book, but that it talks about, like, right, most of us either only know how to recreate, the social molds that we've already seen, or we try to, have this kind of fight or flight sensibility with it. And so to not just go, I want to be defensive and it's time to fight, or, let's just utterly ignore this, right? But how do we really look head on at who are we individually, who are we together, and then who can we be, and it just not run away from the complexity, right? But to try to begin to tackle it together.
Yeah, thank you for that. We don't have enough time to get into, when I'm hearing speakers like yourself, I want the knowledge to just come out and keep flowing. That's just kind of how I'm wired. And I also like making Daryl wait to ask questions. Those are things that bring me joy. But I'm going to keep going because we have a little more time, and I know there's so much in there that you're sharing. You mentioned not knowing your identity can be dangerous. And the thought comes to me at this global camp meeting that churches as a whole, when you speak to 47%, I'm wondering your thoughts, just commenting on, the role that churches play in that decline by not knowing their own identity in the communities that they exist. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Amen. Right. Yeah, huge. I mean, yeah, you said it. You said it, Cliff. So I'm just gonna, for all of us that are indicted, right? I'm just saying, like, you called this out in terms of what it means, right? For churches not to know their identity. So, right, I think it's huge. It's huge both in terms of, I think it is a reflection of, we have to be able, right, to articulate our faith, right? We have to be able to articulate why we practice what we practice. We have to be able to bear witness to the limitless love of God, and like the real difference that actually makes in our lives, right? And so I think, again, to to just say our beliefs, or to use what I would call churchy language, if you can't speak and you can't interact, right, you can't be in conversation with the community around you, the culture around you, right? What difference does it make? And I'll say, right,
yeah, everything you said, I keep tying it to the church. So
Yes.
the church, not, and I'm speaking to myself. So I'm not indicting you. I'm speaking to myself as a Christian, right?
Yes.
In the church that I belong to. If I don't know the identity, if we don't know that, if the church doesn't know its identity in the community, that's dangerous. You also talked about identity salience, right?
Yeah.
So if the church doesn't get outside of the community, if the church only stays with, we're feeding these people, we're doing these types of things, it's like everything you put down there as an individual, as I was listening to you talk, I just tied it, my mind took it to the church, and it gave me a lot of work to do. I have to actually speak tomorrow at my church. And I was talking to the Lord while you were talking to see if I was supposed to even change my title to the weightiness of wholeness. Because I had worked some things out, but I got some more notes I got to put into. But you have given us a lot of things today, and I will let Daryl get in with some of his questions on where he wants to go. But if you are open to it, I would definitely like to, after this event is over, to connect with you and have CARES Learning Partnership, work on bringing you out here, or we have technology now, having you address some of our partners with your expertise and your knowledge. So thank you so much for sharing again. This has been a blessing and informative and inspiring. Thank you so much.
Praise God. Thank you so much for having me. I just, if I can quickly just affirm, right, what you said. So I'll say, sometimes when I do workshops and I invite, right, individuals to look at what's salient for them, I also invite institutions, right, to begin to name, because if what's salient for you is not what's salient for the community that you serve, right, there's going to be a disconnect, right, because you're not actually paying attention, or if you are, you're not showing that you're actually aware of what's salient. And so for folks who are supervisors, for folks who are leaders, and then for the whole church institution, right, to be clear about saliency and to do the work to learn, right, about what's salient is so critical for us to be actually meet needs. So Professor Allen.
Ladies and gentlemen who are watching this, I want you to know that this doesn't surprise me. And I hope that you saw that in this conversation about anti-racism, that it sounded very different than what you thought it would when we're talking about the salience. So all I can say is, Yvonne Gilmore, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to share this information. And I'm not going to ask any additional questions. What I'm simply going to do is I'm going to share that CARES Learning Partnership has the contact information for Yvonne Gilmore. And those of you, wherever you're at in the world, you know now that you need to contact Yvonne Gilmore, and you need to hear more from what she has to say. So make that effort to do that, and be prepared to be blessed and prepared to sacrifice, because when we hear the truth, sometimes what has to be sacrificed is our own thought. So Cliff, Guy, from here in Oak Park, I want to turn this back over to you. Yvonne Gilmore, it has been a pleasure, and I hope to chat with you again.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to you, Daryl and Cliff, and for CARES Learning Partnership. Blessings on the rest of the camp meeting. Yeah, what an honor it's been to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like was mentioned, you can visit our booth at the Global Camp Meeting, or you can just go directly to our website. All of the interviews and things that we have, you can go to CARES Learning Partnership. So it's careslp.org/GC for Global Camp Meeting. And there you'll find all of these recordings. We'll have it posted. And if you want to reach out to Yvonne Gilmore, please contact us and we'll make that connection. Thank you so much. You guys take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be blessed.